Okay, it's a packed room as well. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the best session of the day. No
Well,
pressure.
we'll see.
Yeah.
No pressure
Set
whatsoever.
expectations low.
I know, exceed expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we'll increase it as we go along. So it's great to be joined by two powerhouses in the industry. I think if you guys were celebs, there's an interesting play that you could have here, maybe Brannica or Money Brad. I don't know whichever ones that work for you.
Oh, that's a new one. I haven't heard that. That's good.
No, yeah.
I don't think it's going to catch on either.
Yeah, probably not.
But OK, so you've both been at Ripple now for a little while, over a decade. And Monica, just very briefly, what made you join Ripple all those years ago in 2013?
So it was one of the co-founders, Chris Larson, who's our esteemed executive chairman of our board. Chris, I'd known Chris from his prior life as founder CEO of Prosper. Chris is a serial fintech entrepreneur. He founded eLoan in the 90s and then Prosper in the early noughts and then Ripple. And he is one of those people I think you can attest. Like, he's a real visionary. He sees, like, in decades far out timelines of where the world is headed. I just remember at that time, I was catching up with him in the summer of 2013, and he was just so excited. He was like on fire about the digital gold revolution with Bitcoin, and so excited about XRP Ledger being this whole new payment system for the world. And that was what he was talking about, Internet of Value, things that the whole industry has talked about now, but he was talking about that way back then. So it was really, he inspired me to join.
Fantastic. And for you, 2 years, a few years afterwards, you joined?
Yeah, I joined because Monica was there.
Not true.
Exactly. Look, it's kind of a funny story. I had been introduced to Bitcoin in 2012, and I invested a little bit in Bitcoin, but I always had this, and this is not an anti-Bitcoin statement. I'm pro-Bitcoin. I'm nervous every time I say anything that people are going to be like, oh, Brad's anti-Bitcoin. I'm not. But I remember thinking like that maybe the Achilles heel to Bitcoin might end up being this very anti-bank, anti-government. And I still, to this day, kind of, like, we're not going to have a completely separate parallel system. There's going to be lots of bridges between traditional finance and what we now call decentralized finance. And when I was recruited, and I got a recruiting call about Ripple, and I remember the recruiter called, and he's like, have you heard of Ripple? I lied, and I said yes. And I was like, but remind me what they do. And actually, I mean, and Monica may remember this, he was describing a payments company, and I said, look, I'm not a payments guy. You should, I gave them names of people I knew at PayPal and Visa and trying to like push it off to somebody else. And the recruiter kind of made fun of me because I wasn't working at the time. And he's like, what else are you doing? Like, just come in and meet with Chris. And I agree with Monica. I mean, Chris is one of these guys who just sees around corners. And like, we all have our own superpowers. And I think one of the things that has worked so well is the partnership between Chris and me and Monica. And that Chris sees around corners and we figure out, like, okay, how do we get there? And his vision has been incredibly consistent around this Internet of Value. And I think we still underestimate how significant a shift in how the world works that can and will be. And I think it's going to create a lot of tailwinds for the industry and for Ripple and for XRP.
I have two fun stories to add about that time. You did have a job.
I was an Uber driver.
You were an Uber driver.
That's true.
He was testing some markets with his other friends, potentially
bored.
and exploring entrepreneurial opportunities. I remember that distinctly. And then two, Ashish Birla, who was our head of product for a very long time, GM of RippleNet, but he and I both were really excited to meet Brad and hopeful that he would come on board to Ripple. His fame from Yahoo was the Peanut Butter Manifesto. This concept of, like, Yahoo lost its edge through lack of focus, and Ashish and I were feeling that of XRP Ledger was this magnificent invention, and it was like a hammer looking for a nail. And so we really needed someone, a leader, to kind of drive focus within the business and, like, focus until we could, build product market fit.
And here we are.
I was going to say, this is fascinating. It really is. I
don't think you knew when you asked that question, you probably didn't expect it.
We're going to take up the whole time.
No, it was a gamble. But yeah, I think a lot of people here have got a little bit more insight about you, and they're going to get more as we go along. So but we're going to play a little quick fire round to keep the momentum up, I think. So it's a game of underrated, overrated. And so it's where I'll put a phrase or a word and the simple answer of whether you think it's underrated or overrated. So we'll start off with a few easy ones. Lawyers working in crypto. OK, Brad.
Well, you didn't say Stu Alderodi is underrated. Lawyers in crypto maybe at large, I think mostly underrated. Like they're not that all lawyers in crypto are wonderful, and certainly I've had encounters. I mean, the other side of the SEC case, those are lawyers at the SEC making arguments that you think are complete. You know, I don't think they were good actors. And as the judge said, they were not following a faithful allegiance to the law. So those lawyers, I think, are overrated.
OK, OK. So I was kind of going in a different direction with this. As a child, you wanted to be a lawyer. You can dig into this a little bit as well.
So when I was a kid, this is, maybe I'm 10 or 12 years old. Like, you don't know anything. But my grandfather was a lawyer in the telecom industry, and I was enamored with what I saw of his professional career, and I thought, I want to be a lawyer. Now, Monica thinks it's just because I like to argue.
Yeah, he does.
But yeah, that was my original, that's what I thought. But as you go through that journey, I don't know, what we want to do when we're a kid versus what we end up doing, there's a gap.
There tends to be, yeah. So I tend to ask this a lot, but I think the next one was for you, actually. Yeah. Orthopedic surgeons working in crypto.
So this Pat's also calling too. He'd asked us, like, yeah, what had we wanted to be when we grew up? I was in, elementary school and decided on being an orthopedic surgeon. It's not a great story. It's just that, being a doctor, I wanted to help people, but I knew that orthopedic surgery would be very difficult. I am someone, I think, a pattern. I like big challenges.
So you chose crypto.
Yeah.
I was going to say, there's no link whatsoever. But at least on yours,
yeah.
Brad, there is a little bit of a linkage there. And, the skills of argumentative seem to come across.
I didn't say I'm argumentative.
I said it.
I'm going to ask your team throughout the course of the day.
They're paid to answer that correctly.
Yeah. OK, we're going to switch gears now. Meme coins, underrated, overrated?
We might not agree on this one. I would say underrated, in so much as if you take it for face value, there are a lot of meme coins that are outright scams. I see that. In other cases, some have kind of miraculously become real functioning markets around these meme coins. The thing that I think is really powerful, like you take some of these blockchain ecosystems, meme coins really drove a lot of the ecosystem build out. By that I mean wallet infrastructure and users and capital and new developers and that kind of thing. So I think that there's lasting impact from meme coins. And if you go back to 2016, 2017, the ICO boom was the same for Ethereum.
OK.
I mean, Monica's right. We're a little bit on the other side of this one. I think meme coins are generally, and maybe grossly, overrated. Because I see them as just not sustainable. I think one of the things that Ripple has done well, and I think many in the XRP community have done well, is think about it in long arcs of time. And I mean, look, are people going to make money or lose money in these short spikes in the meme coin industry? Sure. And I will also say I have been wrong on occasion about meme coins. For people who have followed some of my public statements, I used to really speak not so kindly towards Dogecoin. And I was just like, Dogecoin? Like, what? It literally was created as a lark, right? I mean, it wasn't serious. I mean, it is literally a pile of shit as the logo. These are facts.
You got to call a spade
I'm not making anything up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I felt like it doesn't I felt, past tense, that it didn't reflect well on our industry. If we're trying to engage institutions and build those bridges between traditional finance and decentralized finance, Dogecoin isn't representing us well. And at the time, I mean, some of the early inflation of Dogecoins was outrageous and blah, blah, blah. But where I agree with Monica, and I think I got wrong, is Elon Musk willed Dogecoin into so much liquidity that, like, it's not going away. No. And like, okay, it's part of the ecosystem. It plays a role. But I think a lot of the meme coins, it's just like people trying to do these get-rich-quick rug pulls.
Yeah.
And it reflects badly on those of us in the industry trying to build real products for real customers that leverage these technologies. And then frustratingly, and I'll use a US example, you have a elected leader like Elizabeth Warren who doesn't focus on the good work that lots of people in this room and certainly at Ripple are doing, and focuses on these negative use cases. And so I'm going with overrated.
Got you. Yeah, no, certainly there is a line, and I think in some ways it goes against the grain of why this all come around in the first place. Okay, then one question I was kind of asked by your teams to ask is around what's the one crypto meme that perfectly captures the chaos or brilliance of the industry? And you've kind of...
Doge.
One. Yeah, okay.
I mean, for sure, Doge. I mean, it is both the chaos and the brilliance.
Yep.
And, you know, look, in effect, Elon Musk, although he doesn't, to my knowledge, have an economic alignment with Doge, he spoke Doge into leadership and liquidity. And, you know, to some degree, liquidity begets liquidity. And as I said, like, I don't think Doge is going away. And, you know, others have obviously tried to replicate that in creating their own meme coins of many flavors. It's hard to, you know, part of that also is timing. You're early in the market. There weren't as many meme coins, if you will, where now you have an explosion that I just, like, I don't really get it. But I've never purchased a meme coin.
Okay.
Ever.
Maybe today's the day.
And Monica, do you have...
If I did buy one, I'd buy the all the money XRP meme coin.
There you go.
Wow.
Well, now you have to.
Now I have to.
Okay, so you have a homework assignment. Sorry. Oh, the meme.
Yes.
Memes. So I think the "this is fine" meme
By the way,
resonates.
I feel like 25 people in the audience just went online. They're buying all the money.
Oh, no.
Don't do it. Let me get in first. Just kidding.
What is happening? Okay.
We've lost control.
So, the meme of the dog holding the mug and it says "this is fine" and he's in in an inferno. And I say that one because the whole industry, like, it's a nascent technology, and then it's also this new money. It's like building these new markets. So there's high highs and low lows, and the market is a roller coaster. And so in my decade at Ripple, you have to take the long view. You can't get hung up with whether it's a bull or a bear market. You have to really take that long view of what you're building toward. So "this is fine" resonates.
Okay, okay. So we're going to move on to institutional use cases and adoption. What are you seeing underrated, overrated in terms of the use cases on the institutional side? Maybe we can start with you, Monica.
I think payments is still underrated. I think finally, I mean, we've been working on this use case for the better part of a decade. Within the past 1 to 2 years, we're finally seeing stablecoin payments really capturing mind share with any serious payment player in the world. And we're seeing, you know, the traction really growing, not just through market cap, but I mean even stablecoin volumes, $25 trillion. I mean, it's still a fraction of what global FX or cross-border payments is, but we're building toward that.
Okay, and we'll double click on this in a minute or two. But yeah, clearly you're on one side of the fence.
Same question.
Yes.
Well, one of the things Monica and I talked about preparing for this is it's interesting to see where we disagree, and I'll pick one that we might disagree on.
Okay.
The institutional use case around identity, blockchain-based identity, I think is overrated. Now, let me qualify that statement. It's a beautiful vision to imagine having identity blockchain-based and being able to leverage that is a beautiful future. I love that. So that is not overrated. That's underrated. The reason why I think it's overrated as a utility and a use case is, and I frequently, maybe just for fun, I'll ask you, who owns your identity?
Yeah, it's not me, unfortunately.
It's not you. What's interesting, though, the government owns your identity.
Yep.
If you don't have a passport or a birth certificate or a driver's license, whatever, I don't know each country's dynamic, but like, if you don't have those things, you are not who you say you are.
No.
The government owns your identity. Now, we may not like that, but I just view that as, that's just a truism. And you know, one of the things Ripple has tried to do is we're pragmatic. Even though my philosophical view on something may be over here, to build a business and to drive the success of the XRP ecosystem, sometimes you just have to be pragmatic about the world. Even though I love the idea of blockchain-based identity as a utility for blockchains, you have to get government participation to really make it work, and I think that's really hard.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible. He is argumentative. He knew this was but
He's tricking you.
He would poke me, and then
I
would
baited
respond.
her.
Yeah. Which I don't think is impossible.
It's not.
And the point of like government owns our identities, so does big tech. Like this is a problem that we all face, and I do think there's such huge potential and upside toward decentralized identity and using attestations and VCs in order to make it a secure way for us to take back ownership of our identities. I agree, it's going to be a long time to get all the pieces.
I want it to happen, and Ripple might even invest in companies that are trying to do it because we want it to happen. For Ripple to pursue it, I view it as too hard to get governments to lean in and to make it work.
It's going to take a long time.
It's just, look, getting government participation. I mean, look, let's say you are successful. The other problem I see is if you have to have government participation, that means that the economics in terms of how much money you can make is also challenged because governments will regulate it into a place where there's a small margin.
Yeah.
What if you think of it as like an infrastructure component or an enabler to, so like for example, for institutions to use XRP Ledger's DEX, we're doing a bunch of work on permission domains and the permission DEX, but there's got to be a way to implement compliance to use the DEX. And so like, what if you think of it as more of a feature versus like a whole business?
Well, I still think you have to have the government participate. I mean, one of the things that informed my view of this is, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I was talking to a CEO person of a very large bank. And what he said to me was that they won't accept the KYC information, even though the Bank of Monaco or the Bank of Pat might be multi-billion or multi-trillion-dollar banks. I, as the Bank of Brad, won't accept your KYC information because if you got it wrong and then I accept yours, the impact, the negative risk to me is so high, I'm going to redo the KYC even though I think the Bank of Pat might be well run. And so I just think, anyway, it's a, I think, overrated utility issue. Not that, again, the vision is so pure and so beautiful for some of the reasons Monaco is highlighting. I just think it's really hard.
Okay. I love that style of discussion there.
You can imagine what our one-on-ones are like.
Yeah.
This is where I know I need to move on.
Yeah.
We can revisit it later, but this is just going to, yeah.
Okay, this is, okay, we're going to move on then. So banks issuing their own stables. Underrated, overrated? And then there's a follow-up question. So
I'll go first on this one.
Yeah.
I think that also is overrated. In some ways, we've had banks playing with this idea for a while. You know, JPM coin has been out in the world as a concept for like 6 years, I think. The challenge is if you know, JPM does this, is Citibank going to accept JPM coin? Is B of A going to accept? Is DBS? Is MUFG? You know, and so you almost need a neutral player and neutral players. And look, I think Tether is going to continue to be successful. I think USDC is going to continue to be successful. I also think there's an incredibly exciting opportunity around RLUSD. The momentum is very positive. You know, one of the things that people don't know, I've said it a little bit publicly, but there was a period of time where Ripple was minting 20% of all USDC.
Yeah.
And so people ask, well, why did you guys jump in? And you're like, well, we're already minting. We were, if not the #1 minter of USDC, we were #1 or 2. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why don't we actually lean into this market, particularly around our customer segment, around institutional use cases? And I think many people now are increasingly understanding some of our strategy around Hidden Road and how Hidden Road can really drive significant adoption in expanding the stablecoin market. We're not trying to beat USDC or Tether. I think those will continue to thrive and do well.
You can make the pie bigger, I think. Just a similar question, but not the same one. Banks having the ability to successfully issue their own stables.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing it. And I think my response in terms of under or over, it's like to be seen. I mean, Brad makes some valid points here just about, how many stable coins will there be? The more USD issuers you have, you start to fragment liquidity across different issuers, different chains, different liquidity pools, et cetera. So I think what we can agree on and what we know is that the market's going to expand by multiples over the next few years, and like there will be more issuers coming to the market. I think maybe the use case with bank-issued stablecoins is, especially with the large banks, where they create a network amongst themselves and they're using their issued stables for interbank settlement. So it's just making their kind of existing kind of legacy world interbank payment settlement mechanisms more efficient through blockchain, which is probably, but we have seen some examples of that, like I think JP Morgan's efforts were based on that. And this also calls back to like our first strategy and our first go-to-market was working with the big banks on a product called RippleNet, and we found a lot of success there. So I also know from working with those banks as customers that there is a need for this, for greater efficiency and transparency amongst them.
Yeah, no, on the grapevine, we're hearing a number of communities considering this, and the work's going on, but I think they're in the pilot stage still to really come out and talk about it. The next one then, Brad, for you is the rise of non-USD stables. Oh, yeah.
So the way I think about, I mean, obviously today I think the market is 90 to 95% US dollar stablecoins, as we talked about, dominated by Tether and USDC. I think if I were to fast forward, as Monica described, we do at Ripple try to think in longer arcs of time. Like, sorry, what does that look like 10 years from now? I think data today would say the US dollar as a reserve currency in the world is maybe 60 to 65%. And I would assume that you would see the stablecoin market evolve similarly to that over a longer arc of time. Clearly, other reserve currency players would like to make sure that the adoption of stablecoins doesn't erode their position as a reserve currency. Today, you haven't seen that as much, in part because there are use cases around stablecoins for payments that are profound and I think will totally change corporate treasury operations in a bunch of ways. Awesome, love it. There's a lot of people who hold stablecoins because they don't want to hold the Argentinian peso and they live in Argentina. And if they can get out of that, and there are capital controls they have to manage around, but I mean, I'm picking on Argentina. I apologize to the Argentinians here, but in my lifetime, that currency's been devalued basically to zero twice. And so I'd be nervous. And they may be on a nice path now. I don't follow it as closely, but I think the demand right now is the US dollar, although it has deflated by 25% in the last 5 years, is probably the safest of the, amongst the very safest currencies.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think a lot of it boils down to necessity as well. OK, we're going to switch a little bit here because we have 7 minutes left. I have a whole raft of questions still. Tokenization of real-world assets, and rather than ask you the underrated, overrated, I think we know it's the direction of travel. There's been a lot of discussions around this for a number of years, the last few years for sure. From your perspective, Monica, what makes the current moment feel different, and how is Ripple supporting real adoption here?
Yeah. I think it's regulatory clarity more than anything, which in some cases is, it's taken time to get to where we are in this moment, but it's never been better, that's for sure. Singapore, an early leader through MAS, providing regulatory clarity, but markets around the world, and then most recently the U.S. really opening up with the change of administration and a lot of progress, picking up momentum on legislation. And what that means is, we've worked with institutions for a very long time. I was calling back to like our first work with large banks. When you talk to the people who work on payments, work on custody within institutions, they get it. Like they understand the value proposition and they find it compelling and they want to work with companies like ours. But the overhang or the cloudiness around how the regulators were going to treat this activity, it just wasn't worth the risk. And so I think this...
The tipping point, really.
That's the tipping point, exactly. I think that this has been really the turning point is regulatory clarity.
Okay.
It'll be slowly and then all at once.
Ah, yes. So it reminds me of that, I think it's a Hemingway quote, which is gradually, then suddenly, and trends tend to occur. You slowly start to see it, and then bang. It's either going upwards or going downwards. Okay, I was going to ask what's slowing things down, but I think you've kind of outlined that to a degree. I'm going to quickly come back to that underrated, overrated, just for two more things. One is the Genius Act. Underrated or overrated?
Appropriately rated.
Okay, sitting on the fence.
For those of you who don't, so the Genius Act is the name of the stablecoin bill moving through the United States House. It has passed the House and now is in the Senate. I think is likely to pass. But that is focused on stablecoins particularly, not what we call market structure, which is I think also very important for the US, which that provides the clarity on what's a security, what's a commodity, what's a currency, those things. Hopefully we get both passed between now and August. But I feel, I mean, the momentum in Washington on these things is very good. No bill is perfect. I can point to things like, I don't love that, but
there isn't.
Perfection is the enemy of done.
Yes, yes, no, agreed. And I think the whole world is waiting and watching and anticipating, really, and what it does for the industry. I think the other bit then is market infrastructure regulation. You mentioned it yesterday. What's your view, Monica? Maybe I can pick on you.
Yeah, I mean, to Brad's point, that's the kind of the second bill prioritized for the crypto industry in the U.S. right now, and globally, other. I remember FCA, UK FCA came out with, kind of a token classification system a long time ago. Those things are helpful. Again, just the more clarity that the industry can get, then we can innovate, we can get traction, we can really move on the benefits.
Well, even if we go back to your question earlier, the big banks are not going to launch stablecoins if the Genius Act is not legislatively passed.
Yeah.
Even though they may have gotten positive indications from the SEC, what have you, it's like if that doesn't pass, it's just not worth the risk to them. They're like, we'll wait. And I think that would be bad for the industry. I think it'd be bad for U.S. competitiveness. And I will give a shout out. I mean, MAS here in Singapore, but there's a number of other jurisdictions around the world that have been leaders and provided clarity early, and I think their economies have benefited from it. I mean, it's not a coincidence that Ripple, we have a pretty big office here in Singapore. We have a number of amazing leaders here who have a big impact on the region, and that's partly because there was regulatory clarity. We have licensing that is clear here.
We are grateful for your service. Okay, just then on the APAC piece, I think that's a key part of the discussion, and APAC is often described as one of the bright spots, and what's different about this region? You've mentioned MAS, but it's a collective. There is a movement occurring in Asia, and can APAC maintain its leadership position? I think there's two parts to that question. Yeah.
I think I can start. I mean, I do think that being early with clear regulation attracted a lot of the industry. Companies like us, where we were founded in the U.S., but 40–50% of our payments business flows through our Singapore hub. And so I think there's that first mover advantage, which is very sticky for countries like Singapore and Asia as a region. The other piece I'll say about Asia Pac is the pain points are acute. So where we're talking to different companies and businesses about cross-border payment needs, cost, speed, transparency, these things come up as, pressing needs versus you go to the majors, US, Europe, it's a little bit different there.
The only thing I'll add is I think as a community, I mean that broadly, across Singapore, across Southeast Asia, you have a community of entrepreneurs. Like the energy that I feel being here, I mean, it's I think profound. I remember visiting Vietnam for the first time, now this is 15, 20 years ago, but just feeling the energy of the community. And look, I think everyone knows well that the crypto acceptance in South Korea, in Japan, like these are communities that are leaning into new technologies and have often, more often than not, been leaders in technology. And so I think this will continue to be a region that thrives and leads, and I think you'll see more and more faster adoption, partly as you see the US as a regulatory leader, that a lot of other countries look to the US, that I think people grossly underrated how much momentum is going to be created by the largest economy in the world finally shifting into a pro-innovation, pro-crypto posture.
Yeah, it's huge.
I mean, timing was perfect.
Whatever I ask now, I think it's all downhill from there.
This is a good place.
Just now the ending there. I think we're going to leave it at that. We're just on time as well. Can you put your hands together, please?
Thank you.
Wonderful speakers.